John David Woodall is a sociologist who completed a master's degree at the University of Victoria in 2007, following an honors BA in sociology from Trent University in 2005. His graduate research, titled Following the Rainbow Trail, The Reproduction of an Alternative Intentional Community, examined the rainbow family of living light through ethnographic fieldwork at gatherings in Colorado and British Columbia. By employing participant observation and interviews, Woodall explored how individuals and groups sustain identity and community without formal leadership structures. His work situates the rainbow family within broader sociological discussions of intentional communities and countercultural organization, highlighting the symbiotic relationship between individual identity formation and collective belonging in alternative social movements. This study looks at how the rainbow family of living light, a loose network of people who hold free, communal gatherings in the wilderness, manages to keep going and attract new young members after more than 30 years. The author, John Woodall, spent time living and working with the group during two 2006 gatherings and interviewed young adults about why they came. He found that people come for a mix of reasons: to feel part of a loving, open community, to live close to nature, to express their spirituality in their own way, and to take a break from the pressures of normal society. Building kitchens, sharing food, and working together give them a sense of belonging and purpose. The gatherings are organized without formal leaders but rely on cooperation and respect, and even though they sometimes clash with authorities, most participants see themselves as peaceful and independent rather than rebellious. Woodall argues that these temporary communities are successful not because they last forever, but because they change people's lives, helping them feel accepted, connected, and inspired to live differently when they go home. In the opening sections of his thesis, John David Woodall introduces the rainbow family of living light and explains his goal of understanding how this loosely organized community continues to reproduce itself over decades. He describes his methodology, which combines participant observation, semi-structured interviews, and informal focus groups conducted at two rainbow gatherings in 2006. Using actor network theory as his theoretical perspective, Woodall emphasizes letting participants define their own experiences and social worlds rather than imposing outside interpretations. The interviews explore how young adults interpret their participation, spirituality, and sense of belonging, while observations document daily activities and the cooperative, non-hierarchical organization of rainbow life. In discussing his role as an insider, Woodall acknowledges that his personal familiarity with the community provided insight but also raised ethical and interpretive challenges requiring self-awareness and respect for confidentiality. Finally, in addressing readership, he notes that the thesis is intended both for academic audiences and for the rainbow family itself, written in a way that bridges scholarly analysis with the lived experiences of the people he studied. In the introduction, John Woodall explains that his study looks at how the rainbow family, a large, leaderless group that holds annual wilderness gatherings, manages to keep its culture and community alive. He describes how he gathered his information by living with participants, joining in their daily routines, interviewing young adults, sitting in on group conversations, and quietly observing how people work together. His approach, based on a theory that values people's own viewpoints and stories, let participants explain what the rainbow family means to them rather than forcing outside labels on their experiences. One key topic that emerged from the interviews was spirituality, which many saw as deeply personal and tied to their connection with nature and others rather than organized religion. Woodall also talks about being an insider since he had experience with the community before starting his research, which helped him gain trust but also required careful balance to stay objective. He ends by saying the paper is written not only for scholars but also for the rainbow family itself, so that both groups can understand how this alternative community works and why it matters. In the section titled Context, John Woodall explains where the rainbow family came from and what makes it different from ordinary society. He shows that the group grew out of the 1960s counterculture, people who were tired of war, pollution, and strict social rules and wanted to live more freely, peacefully, and in tune with nature. Over time, this attitude became what he calls an oppositional consciousness, meaning a shared mindset that quietly resists mainstream culture without needing formal leaders or organized protests. Older members once focused on political activism, while younger ones tend to express their beliefs through personal growth, spirituality, and community living. The physical setting of rainbow gatherings, remote forests and mountain meadows, is also important because it lets people temporarily leave normal life behind, build camps and kitchens together, and experience what it feels like to live simply and cooperatively. Altogether, this part of the thesis explains how the rainbow family's history, beliefs, and wilderness settings shape the way it survives as an alternative community. The author describes the instant soup kitchen, one of the many small, self-run communities that make up a rainbow gathering. Located in a meadow far from the main camp, this kitchen served as both a food center and a social hub where people cooked, ate, talked, and built friendships. Though the kitchen had no formal leaders, it operated with a clear sense of teamwork. Some people gathered firewood or fetched water, others cooked, washed pots, or helped with cleanup. Everything was built from scratch using simple materials like poles, rope, and tarps, and by the end, the kitchen could feed hundreds of people each day. Despite the apparent chaos, there was quiet order and cooperation rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. When the gathering ended, everyone helped take everything down and return the land to its natural state, leaving little trace behind. Woodall uses the instant soup kitchen as a small-scale example of how the rainbow family works. People come together voluntarily, share labor and resources, and create a temporary but deeply meaningful community. In Reproducing the Family, the Creation of Identity, Woodall explains how the rainbow family keeps renewing itself by building a shared identity that is intentionally outside the mainstream yet broadly welcoming. A sense of standing apart from consumer culture, formal authority, and rigid hierarchy gives members common ground, while everyday cooperation, especially around kitchens, makes that identity tangible and repeatable at each gathering. The result is a culture that reproduces less through formal rules and leaders and more through practice habits that people can step into and learn by doing. Identity is built and maintained through identity work, visible markers, dress, hair, familiar rituals, drumming, meal circles, and shared labor that create a lived experience of community rather than a theoretical one. Two mechanisms are central. First, unconditional acceptance gives newcomers room to try on roles and grow. Second, explicit validation, being thanked, relied on, and seen links the individual's self-image to the group's collective identity in a mutually reinforcing way. Many participants openly embrace the outsider label instead of hiding it, which further stabilizes the group's distinctiveness across cohorts. Storytelling acts like a maintenance ritual. Retelling origin tales, travel episodes, and kitchen lore helps people make sense of who they are and passes norms to newer members, strengthening both personal and collective identities. Not everyone returns, and the thesis notes practical reasons, cost, work or school constraints, and life changes that make a week-long, off-grid gathering harder to prioritize, even for those who valued the experience. Finally, there are clear generational differences. Older members often frame spirituality and action in outward, universal terms, healing the planet, world peace, while many younger adults describe spirituality as an inward journey tied to personal growth and connection. This inward focus also shows up in how they interpret the role of the state and social problems. Episodes of conflict with authorities still shape a shared sense of outsiderness, but overt confrontation is not the main engine of participation or identity for most people today. Young adults describe spirituality at gatherings as personal and experiential rather than tied to any one faith. Many talk about synchronicities, a felt oneness, and a permissive mix of beliefs. Rituals generate shared emotional energy, but it is fed back into the group rather than elevating a single leader, reinforcing a sense of collective spirit and belonging. The setting matters. Participants value being deep in nature and the rainbow norm of walking lightly on the land. Camping far from towns offers adventure and a simple, cooperative way of living. People often frame it as a chance to feel like pioneers while committing to leave minimal trace when they depart. Work is part of the draw and the reward. Building and running kitchens gives people a practical way to serve others and make a community they can be proud of, which many feel is missing in their day jobs. Shared labor helps shy newcomers bond and find friends, and the visible results, feeding hundreds daily, validate their effort and identity. Over time, participants learn that belonging carries both responsibilities and benefits, a lesson passed on through doing the work together. In Intentional Communities and Anarchism, Locating the Family, the author connects the rainbow family to the broader idea of intentional communities, groups of people who deliberately choose to live or work together based on shared values rather than social obligation. He explains that although rainbow gatherings are temporary and lack permanent structures, they still qualify as intentional communities because participants consciously commit to cooperation, equality, and mutual care during the event. This commitment isn't about long-term residence but about being fully engaged in communal life while it exists. Woodall also notes that people who join such communities are often seeking alternatives to mainstream culture, wanting closer relationships, meaningful work, and a sense of purpose. Finally, he argues that the usual definition of success for intentional communities, how long they last, should be rethought. For the Rainbow family, success lies in the impact the experience has on people's lives and in how its spirit and values continue after members return to the outside world. In the final summary, John Woodall brings his ideas together by explaining that the Rainbow family survives not because it has leaders, money, or formal structure, but because people keep choosing to return and rebuild it year after year. The gatherings work as living examples of how cooperation, acceptance, and shared effort can create a functioning community, even if only for a short time. For many participants, especially young adults, the experience gives a deep sense of belonging, spiritual renewal, and purpose that they struggle to find in regular society. Woodall concludes that the Rainbow family shows how alternative communities can challenge mainstream ways of living and still succeed by touching people's lives, inspiring them to live more mindfully and compassionately, and carrying those values back into the wider world once the gathering ends. Woodall conducted his fieldwork for the study at the 2006 National Gathering in the Root National Forest, Colorado, and later at a regional gathering on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, the same summer. In the appendices, John Woodall describes the physical layout and social dynamics of the Colorado National Rainbow Gathering to show how the temporary community functions like a small, self-sufficient village. The site was set in the mountains, with forests, meadows, and winding trails linking different areas, each with its own purpose. Every space reflected the cooperative spirit of the Rainbow family, created entirely by participants using simple tools, natural materials, and shared effort. The way people built and organized these areas demonstrated the family's belief in living lightly on the land while still meeting everyone's basic needs. The trade circle was one of the most active and energetic spaces. It was a bustling, open-air marketplace where people exchanged handmade goods, jewelry, art, food, and clothing, not with money, but through bartering or gifting. The area drew a mix of personalities, from gentle gatherers to loud street-style traders, creating a lively and sometimes chaotic atmosphere. Despite the noise and tension, the trade circle symbolized a core Rainbow value: community exchange without profit. It showed how people could share resources freely and meet their needs outside of capitalism, even if only for a short time. The Kiddies Village was a quieter and more structured area designed for families with young children. Volunteers ran the Kiddies Kitchen, ensuring that parents and kids had steady access to good food without having to spend hours cooking. The space emphasized care and responsibility, with older members or longtime focalizers helping to maintain order and safety. It was one of the few places at the gathering with clear rules, especially about hygiene and volunteering. This structure reflected the Rainbow family's adaptability, showing that even a non-hierarchical, anarchic community could organize itself effectively when the need arose. Finally, Woodall describes the new kitchen and water system, which represented the constant creativity and teamwork that keep a Rainbow gathering running. The new kitchen was a recently established cooking area, still finding its rhythm and organization, while the water system was a shared network that brought clean water from nearby springs to multiple kitchens. These systems depended entirely on volunteer labor, cooperation, and trust. Together, they revealed how the Rainbow family, without formal leadership or hierarchy, can still create a functioning society, one that feeds, hydrates, and sustains thousands of people in the middle of the wilderness.